Yoko Taro, a name more or less everyone knows for being the director of the Nier series of games, becoming immensely popular with the release of Nier Automata in 2017. I know it's where I got into it, but some may not know that Nier is actually a spin-off of an earlier series named Drakengard, the original being a PS2 title from 2003, as well as Taro's first game. And though I actually own Drakengard 1, 3, the original release of Nier, its remake, Nier Replicant, and Automata, I've only played the latter two, so I wanted to go back and look at the series in its entirety and see how we get to the Nier series, and the wacky stories that ensue. As an aside, I apologise for any stuttering in the video footage. This was due to the emulator I was using. No clue why it happened, but apart from that, it played fine, so as they say, country girls make do. An added quick content warning, if you've seen my drunk retelling of Drakengard's plot, there's a content warning there as well. Drakengard is a very dark game and covers many, many dark topics. Pretty much every sort of content warning I could possibly think of, it would probably apply to Drakengard. So if that's something you don't think you can handle, please do, stop the video, dip out. But if you're okay, let's get into the video.
Down below, I burn in the basin of wine. Watchers look on as they dance in the merciless skies, watching me, watching you, watching you.
The game begins with a monologue going over the state of the world. The Union, a group of smaller countries, are in an endless war against the Empire. We play as Kaim, a prince in the Union who's in the thick of an intense battle. This serves as the tutorial level. You don't start with much, you have a 3-hit combo with square, and triangle uses a magic attack, or pressing triangle in the middle of a combo will perform an AoE move. It's basic, but for what it is, it gets the job done. The missions here are very Dynasty Warriors-esque, with you mowing through hundreds if not thousands of enemies per level. Kaim gets a nasty slash in the back during the fight and gets called back to the castle's courtyard. He finds a dying dragon and Kaim does not like what he sees, having a flashback to his parents being attacked by a dragon. Kaim originally wants to end the dragon's life, but hesitates, suggesting that they make a pact together, a ritual where a human and magic being can fuse these orb thingies they pull out themselves? Are they their souls? I don't know, it's never explained and you never see anything like this again. Anyway, making a pact heals any prior wound and grants the human magical power. At a cost though, the two's lives are now linked. If Kaim dies, the dragon dies and vice versa, as well as the human having to give up something of themselves in exchange. For Kaim, he has to give up his voice, being a really inventive way of making him into a silent protagonist. The Empire are here to capture the goddess inside the castle, so after another tutorial on how to use the dragon, Kaim rushes into the castle. You also get different weapons by finishing levels or meeting certain requirements inside them, those being axes, hammers, longswords, maces, pole axes, spears, staves, and swords respectively. That sounds like a wide variety of weapons to play with, but it changes next to nothing in terms of gameplay. All combos feel exactly the same, and magic has extremely minimal differences. The more XP you gain and enemies you kill, the more your weapon levels up, improving stats like damage and magic, and unlocking the weapon stories. Every weapon has one, and they can range on the creation of the weapon itself, lore and world building, so on and so forth. This is a staple in Yoko Taro's games going forward, and I'll talk about it a bit more in its own dedicated section towards the end of the video. Kaim tears through more soldiers and meets up with the goddess, Furiae, who turns out to be his sister, and his childhood friend Inuart. She was chosen as the 14th goddess, and due to this, she's forced to sever her human connection she's had up until this point, including her engagement to Inuart. Since he's more of a bard than a fighter like Kaim is, he plays a little sing-song for the two before suggesting they go to the elf village, since the elves are a neutral party and they'll be safer from the Empire.
The usual song?
18 naked cowboys in the showers at Ram Ranch. Big haired throbbing cocks wanting to be sucked.
Drakengard is a really unique presentation. They showed the speaking characters' heads in the bottom left corner, and since Kaim can't speak, it's great for gauging his facial expressions and body language during particular situations. Games have done this earlier and since, JRPGs like the Persona games come to mind, but I think the fact that the faces are 3D models instead of 2D artwork makes it really stand out for me in my mind. You get more ground missions, and it's apparent that the camera is absolutely rancid. You can't control it, making the controls feel kind of tank-like? It's really hard to adjust to, but I found the best way to deal with it is by holding L2. Kaim guards and provides a little lock-on when he's up against an enemy. It's better, but not ideal. Surprise, surprise, despite being neutral, the Empires attack the Elves as well, so it's up to Kaim to pick off the remaining troops since Inuart is insisting on checking out the village directly and can't trust the word of the dragon for some reason. It's also explained that pack partners can project their thoughts to each other, meaning the dragon will speak for Kaim and other pack partners can project their thoughts to them, giving another avenue for background dialogue in the levels. It also looks like Furiai, Inuart, and the random soldiers seem like they can do the same for some reason. Maybe it's because it's the dragon hearing it and then projecting that to Kaim? Speaking of, the dragon picks up a message from someone named Verdele, who requests they take Furiai to the desert for protection. The dragon and Kaim want to investigate a bit further here though before heading to the desert, and find a dying elf next to a message written in blood.
Speak not the watchers, draw not the watchers, write not the watchers, sculpt not the watchers, sing not the watchers, call not the watcher's name. What is this?
The message seems paradoxical, but it's actually meant to convey that the spread of the Watchers will happen regardless if their religion is spread by themselves or not. Like, it's just something that'll happen organically, there's no way of controlling it, but that's something we'll get more into later on. Another dying elf, I think, crawls up to Kaim for help, and he just kicks him over. There's no need for that. It's so just unnecessary that it wraps around to being really funny.
Rivers Luke Hagen. My brothers, forgive me. Forgive me.
Well, that's a bit of a downer. This is Leonard, who's returned to the site of his home being destroyed and brothers slaughtered. That's when Leonard basically gets harassed by a fairy straight out of an Xbox 360 COD lobby.
Your sorry, pitiful little brothers, dead on the ground. What fun! What fun! Yuck! What a painful sight! Look! Looky, look! What was the last thing they saw? I wonder. Pathetic! Dirty! Smelly! Might as well just die! Hey, that's it! Kill yourself! Go on!
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
Scared?
and convinces him to make a pact. In his moment of weakness, he goes through with it. And when Kaim finds him, we find his price was his eyesight. With nothing else to lose, he joins the party. Turns out, Verdelay and Inuart were captured, but the Empire left Furii alone? I think she says that she hides from the Imperial troops, but it's not super clear why they wouldn't at least look for her. Because it didn't seem like Kaim was gone for that long. In any case, we gotta go save them. The next level is in complete darkness, to the point where the biggest challenge is seeing what the fuck is going on. The dragon also brings up a really odd question about Kaim and Furii, which is a topic that will be discussed much later. Finally, we meet Verdelay in person for the first time. He's a very old man who made a pact with a petrified dragon, giving up his hair as his pact price. Since his dragon is petrified, he's near immortal with immense magic power. He's definitely won the pact raffle here, although I remember reading somewhere that he made the pact when he was really young and good looking, so him being bald would have been worse then, I guess. It's still a way better deal than everyone else, but whatever. Inuart's not here though. He's been taken to a separate prison, and it's surprisingly glossed over considering the rest of the game's subject matter, but Inuart's pretty clearly being tortured here. He's strapped in place in the baking desert sun. A voice calls out to him, urging Inuart to gain strength by making a pact with a dragon, to protect Furii and win her heart. The only thing the gang manages to find of Inuart is his harp. Except that's a lie, he rocks up with a black dragon, the very same dragon that murdered Kaim and Furiai's parents. He claps Kaim's cheeks in a fight, Verdelay's useless, and Inuart gives Furii an unwanted smooch, and she gives him the most cartoon sound effect slap I've heard in my life. He traded his abilities to make song for his pact, and yes, it's good symbolism. He's traded the one thing that makes him unique and Furii loves most about him for power, but that's also a pretty good trade-off. Come on, it's not as good a deal as Verdelay, but still, he's also doing good in the pact lottery here. The next level is just like all goblin fights, and Verdelay is way too into it. Most of his dialogue is him saying that everyone deserves mercy and how horrible fighting is, but anytime it's something non-human, he absolutely adores telling Kaim to cut them all down while they're running away from him, and that none deserve to be left alive and they're a scourge on the earth. He's just a speciesist, hypocritical old twat all around. I guess he's like a fantasy racist. In the cutscene after, it confirms that the dragon can read minds. And that's kind of mad that we got this information from just a random dying ogre, but it is what it is. We're taking the fight directly to the Empire now. Another general critique I have of Drakengard is the in-game dialogue can be really confusing to follow. Not the plot and character bits, but when all the characters saying that everything's going wrong and, the battle's being lost and they're nearly close to being annihilated when you're just completing objectives and levels. I know the game wants to keep its somber tone, but it's really hard to unlearn that the characters panicking and saying how everything is going wrong doesn't mean that you're playing the mission incorrectly. This leads to a big final battle with the Union against the Empire. It takes place in that same place that the final fight in the Phantom Menace is in, with all the droids and the Gungans, or the Windows 95 background, I can't tell. To be honest, this was less of a battle and more of a gauntlet of running all over the map, killing specific enemies. Now, that's how every ground mission has been, don't get me wrong, but this one specifically is the most painful so far. The timer for missions has always been an hour, but up until now, I've never needed nearly as much as that to complete a level. This is a massive exception. It took 50 goddamn minutes to fully finish this level. I suppose it's good for replaying to grind weapon levels, but man, when you're just trying to get through the story, it is rough. The Union end up winning, but wop wop, the Empire nukes the remaining troops from orbit with the help of their man-made golems and airships. I love the level you have to play in the aftermath, though. Trying to navigate through this hellscape of an area really just lets the destruction caused by the Empire sink in and hit home. It's very Eclipse-coded. The dragon tries to fly up to the airships, but it just can't make it. Inuart sets out to fight, but he doesn't seem like himself anymore. Over the course of the game, many of the Empire soldiers seem to be acting in a sort of hive mind, having a very monotone and repetitive way of speaking, all of them having red eyes, and ever since making the pact, Inuart has gained the same eye colour. Also, a little girl is in here with him, but I'm sure that's completely unrelated. His boss on the Black Dragon is honestly the best bit in the game so far by a mile. I mean, the dragon combat is the best part of the game. It takes a lot of inspiration from the game Ace Combat, but I've never actually played that series, so this was all new for me, but it was really fun. Once he's beaten, you rush into the fortress to rescue Furii, and the noise she's making on the way there.
Climb.
You hear Bria's voice? Run to her!
Oh, alright, love. Settle down. Jeez. Kime's too late though, so those noises must have been her dying. That's much better. In his despair, the dragon gives Kime as good of a pep talk as she can, given the circumstances, and I think it shows the way of her growing genuine care and concern for Kime across the story. I think it's well done. Seeing Furiai's body seems to snap Inuart out of his possession, and we get a better look at the girl mentioned earlier. This is Mana, the priestess of the cult of the Watchers. Based on the very unchildlike voice that accompanies her, this is who coaxed Inuart into making his pact, and I do think that this scene with Inuart having a breakdown over his betrothed's death is effective, but the visual of Mana spin dashing in the background and the la 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 is hysterical.
A miracle. The goddess will live again.
Oops, I think the accent slipped a bit there, fella. You get another harder battle with him before he flies off defeated. The dragon and Kime then have the giant worm to deal with, which initially has the dragon terrified, as going against the worm is practically heresy and a hopeless endeavour to dragonkind, but in the end she decides to fight regardless, and yes, this boss was stupidly hard. I am not a fan. Most of the time the worm will stay in an orb form, and you can only damage it once it uncurls fully, and it might just be me, but getting really close to it, does anyone else think it looks suspiciously like E.T.? Once it's killed, you get another on-foot battle revolving around grabbing keys. So many keys. Kime and Verdali eventually confront Mana. Kime's fine with killing her, but Verdali decides that going through with it is way too dark, so tries to seal her power. But of course, he finds a way to fuck it up, and Mana grows into a giant. Now we get another dragon fight against a gigantic Mana. It's not awful, it's way less frustrating than the worm fight. It's mainly just about waiting for her to attack, dodging, and counter-attacking, plus you can play riskier and get a lot more damage in if you so choose. After the battle, Mana goes back to her normal size. The Watcher possessing her seems to have left her body, and unable to handle the weight of what she's done, begs for the group to end her life. The group decide against it and instead force her to live with the guilt of her actions, which kind of surprised me since A, it's Kime, murder is like his favourite pastime, And B, in her defense, she was possessed and is clearly traumatized by some form of neglect, which we will get to later. So their disdain for her seems a little bit harsh in my opinion. With Furii gone, they need to find a new vessel for the seal quickly. The dragon offers to go through with it, with the reasoning that if anyone tries to destroy the seals again, they aren't going to be able to defeat a dragon. This is clearly a painful process, and it goes to show how much the dragon has actually changed, actively offering herself to protect humanity. In the last moments together, she tells Kaim her name, Angelus. Finally, I can call her Angelus, and her actual name. Cat's out of the bag now, I knew the whole time, and I was sick of just calling her the dragon, to be honest. Her name is Angelus. This by far is the most emotional you see Kaim in the whole game, with the implication being that they've grown a borderline romantic emotional attachment to each other. Kaim clearly went to the donkey school of dragon taming. With what remains of the world saved, the game closes on Ending A, the anguish of an unsmiling watcher. This isn't close to the end of the game, however, and Yoko Taro's staple debuting here is multiple endings, so let's talk about what the rest of the game is hiding and what happens in said endings. To get Ending B, you need to be in UR again within 4 minutes 30 seconds this time. We follow him as he carries Furia's body off to the Seeds of Resurrection to try and revive her. Angela seems to know more about it than she's letting on, though. It's been hinted that they're not quite what the other characters believe they are. She tries unsuccessfully to talk Inuart down, and I have to say, as bashed as the voice acting tends to be online for this game, I think for an early 2000s PS2 game, the English dub is pretty damn solid, bar a few exceptions. Primarily the minor characters, which I'll talk about later when it's particularly relevant. After yet another boss battle against Inuart, this one infinitely more annoying since he flash steps out the way every 2 seconds when you try to attack, Angelus finally spills the beans, that the Seeds of Resurrection are in fact the Seeds of Destruction. Despite thoroughly whooping his ass, he manages to get Furia's body back to the seed, and it actually works. Furia is brought back to life. Something went right in Drakengard. Of course, that lasts for all of 2 seconds, immediately killing Inuart, and in one of the creepiest cutscenes in the entire game, we see she's been turned into this angelic scorpion woman thing. Her attacks are telegraphed pretty clearly, but you only get a few seconds to dodge in the correct direction. In the aftermath of the battle, Kaim's seen holding his sister's bodies in his arms as countless clones of the monstrous form of his sister rise into the sky. Cutting to black, we get Ending B, Flowers for a Broken Spirit. The credits theme is also different this time, being the full version of Growing Wings. As well as being more or less the main theme of the game, it also serves as Furiai's theme. I'll discuss the meaning of the lyrics more in depth when we talk about the characters more. I haven't really touched on the music at all, which is rare for me in these videos, but it sure is different. The composer, Nobuyoshi Sano, has stated that the purpose of the soundtrack was to create a sense of madness, and oh boy, mission accomplished. It fits the bleak tone of Drakengard, but bar a few exceptions like the aforementioned Growing Wings, there's very few tracks I would choose to listen to outside of the game. Most of them are ear grating, but I do understand that that is the point. There's still more endings to get though, so let's press on. To get Ending C, you have to be in UR in Chapter 9 Verse 3 within 4 minutes 20 seconds. Funny weed. This time he collapses before he can try to resurrect Furii and asks to lie dying beside her, passing away with a smile on his face. It then cuts to Mana being eaten by dragons off screen. Wow. Angela suddenly evolves into her Chaos form and explains to Kaim that the pair are fated to fight to the death, breaking off their pact, because they can just do that now. I'm not fully sure why Angelus switches sides here in the first place. I've looked online and the closest answer I can find is the worm would live long enough in this route for it to be at its full strength, so all dragons would have to follow its orders and essentially take the world back for themselves, but I don't know. The boss fight against Angelus is by far the best bit of ground gameplay, although that was a very low bar. Angelus performs the same attacks as when you're in control of her, the aim being to smack her head with your weapon. She also reveals a lot of intriguing lore tidbits about dragons being made as tools to destroy humanity. And what does Kaim have to say to any of this? To his closest ally turning against him in a fight to the death where he finally can speak.
I am Kaim.
Riveting. Kaim is the last one standing. Hearing the roar of dragons, he rushes into battle, concluding Ending C, a companion's eternal farewell. Two endings remain, so let's get into how to get endings D and E a bit more. In order to obtain Ending D, you need to complete all of the available story missions in the game. Most of the allies you meet across Drakengard have specific side missions tied directly to them, so let's get those over first. Starting with the first ally you find, Leonard's Regret. The group spend more time in the forest since the attack is more intense here. Now in the western version, it's never explained why Leonard was away when his home was attacked. There's no easy way to put it, he's a nonce. He went away to whack to boys. It's also why the fairy is particularly abusive to him. It can read his repressed thoughts, even taking a boyish form to deliberately mock him further. Fairies are just apparently just really fucking horrible in Drakengard's world as well. Not just Leonard's, just all of them are nasty, nasty creatures, which is just a detail I find really funny. As Kaim and Leonard go further into the forest, they come across the main bulk of the Empire's forces here, including conscripted child soldiers. Leonard is horrified at the prospect of killing them, but they're in Kaim's way, so he has absolutely no issue in cutting them down, and the fairy also just revels in what's going on. It's all very grim. Leonard comes across a specific conscript that looks just like his fallen brother. He insists on giving the soldier a proper burial. That is until he's nearly killed by them. Turns out they're undead, being controlled by flying ghost enemies you come across through the game. After more murking conscripts and so many knights on horses, the King of the Fairies alludes to trouble in the desert and demands that they leave. They do actually manage to protect a seal for once, so that's nice for them. To get the game's next ally, you have to complete Chapter 8 Verse 3 within 20 minutes. Upon completing the mission, Verdelay hears a faint voice coming from an Imperial jail, so they decide to investigate. And because of this, we get what is quite possibly the funniest cutscene I've ever seen in any game.
No matter how much I hear it, I can't avoid that voice.
Is that so? I've grown fond of it, I have.
Long as it's a woman, huh? You're the odd one, liking an elf like that. Have you seen her eyes? Pretty scary if you ask me. Even when she smiles, they're dead.
Me, I feel sorry for her. Better for her if she had died with the rest of her family. Right then, let's go settle her down.
Careful, mate. She'll get you for sure.
That's all right. We're not her type now, are we?
What the?
Oh, bloody hell! The Union! They're attacking!
I said before that the voice acting is pretty good for the time, but like I mentioned, that's pretty much only for the actual main characters. Kaim and Verdelay find the source of the voice, a woman named Ariosh, and the first thing she does is try to eat Kaim. Verdelay puts on a holding spell to keep her in check, and purely just because they think they can't leave this insane cannibal to her own devices, she becomes an ally. What a game. So, to progress further to Ending D, you have to replay the cutscene where you first meet Verdelay, after you get Ariosh. Her pact partners, Undine and Salamander, will say the seal in the desert has already been broken, and you'll get a choice to either check that out or go to the Temple of the Sea. You'll want to do the latter to start Ariosh's madness, which is her side story. Since we're here, I'll discuss her character now. There isn't as much to her as I would like, personally, to be honest. Before the events of Drakengard, she was a normal elven woman with a husband and kid. That is until the Empire ransacked her village, her partner and child being casualties in the attack. This, in combination with her pact price being her womb, meaning that she can never have a child of her own blood again, caused her to snap mentally. She's so far gone that all of her trauma has led to believe that the world is just too cruel for young people to survive, and that they're safer in her. That's the reason she's obsessed with eating people. The next mission plays into this. The Imperial Navy are throwing captured kids into the water, and Jesus, it's super unsettling since you can hear their desperate screams for help all throughout gameplay as just background noise. So, what's Ariosh's response to all this carnage? Eat whatever corpses she can get her cheeky little mitts on, obviously. Classic Ariosh. Turns out, womp womp, the ocean seal's broken. Who could have guessed? A Drakengard first. This ends her side story. It's not as good as Leonard's regret in terms of getting into her character more, in my opinion, but at least Ariosha's madness is purely dragon combat. In order to find the last ally, Sere, you need to finish chapter 4 verse 9 within 20 minutes. The first thing you'll learn about this kid is that his mum's dead. Oh dear. He made a pact with a golem, his price being his time, meaning he'll remain a kid forever. As an aside, the little smiley face that you drew on the golem always manages to make me chuckle. It's just a really fun bit of character design. I find the way Kaim and Angelus treat Saria when first coming across him pretty notable. The pair really seem to pity him. Granted, Kaim's clearly uncomfortable when he grabs his leg, but his general body language and Angelus's tone of voice when speaking to him really convey a sense of sympathy that they don't really show to anyone else in my view. He explains his sister was kidnapped by the Empire, so I like to imagine Kaim sees a bit of himself in Sere. He might be a psychotic mass murderer, but he isn't completely devoid of emotions. Though no prize for guessing who Sere's sister is, since, oh, I don't know, he's practically identical to Mana. To progress in his side story, Sere's Prayer, you need to go back to chapter 4 verse 6 and agree to investigate the valley where he says his sister went missing along with his mother. Weird since we saw his mother at the start of his story and it was just the two of them there. The boy thanks the group for helping him search for his sibling when they're attacked by wizard-controlled golems. The fairy is also just really verbally abusive to Sere here, which there's no need for that, he's just a kid. Lay off. Although having a young boy running around with Leonard and Ariosh of all people is the worst idea I can possibly think of. During the upcoming aerial mission, we get more insight on Mana as a character. Because she didn't possess the family gift of golem sorcery, she was heavily abused by her mother, whereas Sere was loved and smothered by her, which is something he says he feels incredibly guilty about. This lack of parental affection is what led to her becoming possessed by the Watchers, and it's something we've clearly seen affects her in the other endings, even when she's more lucid. Sere's golem gets possessed by a wizard later on, and it just absolutely buttons him. The shock of the punch, since being a pact partner affected the golem too, manages to snap it out of the trance, and I think when Sere gets smacked, Arios tries to take a bite out of him. Oh, put the cone of shame on her, for God's sake. Although I don't get why Sere doesn't just stand out of the way and let the group track the wizard down, since, you know, he just hurt his best friend, in his own words. He is kind of a stupid brat, actually, isn't he? He then immediately gets taken when told not to shout in the middle of a battlefield and completely ignores what the group tell him to do. I'm turning around on the fairy being nasty to Sere now at this point. He's kind of asking for trouble. At this point, just let Ariel off a leash to turn around for 5 minutes. What happens, happens. Can't be helped. Okay, maybe that's a bit extreme. They seem to be trying to go in for a little character arc for Seren, not feeling useless, and Kaim using his sword for good, in this case saving Seren from this random goblin gang that's a story point for a minute. But I find this setup absolutely hilarious. I'm not sure why, although I think it's because of the voice acting for the orcs and goblin group. But the arc is just so minor and non-committal that it does not land at all for me, and it honestly just left me disliking Sere more. Oh, and while all this was going on, the remaining seals were broken, making Furii the last one again. And that's the end of Sere's Prayer, easily the worst side story out of the three. With all the side stories completed, it's on to Chapter 10, an aerial mission at the Cult's Ocean Fortress. Shockingly, the group is too late to retrieve Furii, only finding a purple void in the middle of the room. This is a new type of magic called a space bridge? Okay. So it's teleportation magic, basically. Kaim and Leonard jump in and end up getting flown to completely different places, so it's time to look around. And by look around, I mean kill hundreds more people. Classic Kaim. In a twist, Kaim finds his sister. Alive! Mana and the Watcher look into Furiai's heart, and in the English version, all that's really stated is just that she hates being the goddess and wants to be held by her brother, which, yeah, fair enough. By the sounds of it, being the goddess of this world is a shit deal. Who wouldn't want a hug? It's stressful. In the Japanese version, that bitch wants much more than a hug, if you know what I'm saying. Ugh. This is why Kaim closes his eyes and turns away from her. Since he's unable to speak, he's showing his shame and disgust in her by doing this. Murder on an insanely massive scale? All well and good, it is what it is. But incest is where he draws the line. The man has principles, you've gotta respect that. This rejection fuels her to take a knife and... ouch. This plot point was a direct response to Yoko Taro's hatred of a popular anime series at the time called Sister Princess, and other Japanese media that freely includes such relationships. And to be honest, if you've watched a decent amount of anime, you'll know this lambasting of the trope is even more prevalent as time has gone on. Angelus has to talk Kaim down from stabbing Mana then and there so they can get out and try to save what remains of the world. That's the most we can progress here for now. You need to complete another air mission and run through the same ground missions as before, this time with no enemies within 2 minutes, and let me tell you, waiting for the treasure chest to spawn to get both weapons in this level is an absolute ball ache. I mean, I passed the level with literally 1 second on the timer to spare. It was ridiculous. In this scenario, there's no space bridge to be found, with the implication that Furiai's already died, so Kaim in response just smacks the shit out of Leonard instead. Recurrent theme in Drakengard, when something's going wrong, Kaim hits his friends. To get further, the method is really fucking weird. You have to go all the way back to chapter 11 verse 1, again, get right to the end of the level, get the key, and instead of going forward, get backward, and Mana just appears out of nowhere in a random room off to the side with absolutely no indication from the game that this is the correct thing to do. Afterwards comes one of the worst missions in the game, running around the same rooms again and again until you find the right Mana out of a bunch of clones. When found, Sere tries to get her to come back to reality, but she completely ignores him, too far gone, and babbles on about love over and over. Out of options, Sere asks his golem for help, and he just squishes her. Alright, mate, great help. Don't think of getting her to a counselor, just turn her into a paste on the side of the road. Turns out I was wrong actually, Kaim's sister's not dead. You get a cutscene with her in Ensue, I'm gonna be very honest, I've watched this cutscene a few times and I have no clue what he's trying to get at. The most I can gather is I think he's just fully lost the plot now and is just coming to terms with dying together with her. With their spokesperson now a pancake, the Watchers descend from the heavens, taking the form of giant stone babies, with flashes of lightning taking the pattern of wings. Kaim hops onto Angelus's back and murks hordes of the creepy things before fighting them on foot, and this specific level is one of the instances where the insane music works really well for me. It sounds like reversed audio of something like a music box or one of those light up thingies you put over a crib. Uh, no clue what they're called, but you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes little things like toys or decorations or whatever attach to them and they spin around and they can sometimes play little songs to make babies go to sleep. I don't know. I no babies here. Anyway, it's really unsettling, is what I'm trying to say. During the chaos, Arios runs into a horde of them, ready to partake in her greatest feast, only for the Watchers to pull an Uno reverse card on her regular eating habits. With Verdele cowering in the corner in terror, Leonard decides to create a path for the Kaim, CA, and Angelus, and no, I don't like this bit, Sarah. Step away from the nonce, thank you. In a moment I do like, though, he declares that this end does not mean the end of hope, and, against the fairies' protests, sacrifices himself for the group. Seri then tells the remaining characters the story of the little hero, a fairy tale. He's mentioned it a few times throughout the game, but it's here he tells the story in full, about a person who drank all of time and awoke to save the world at the brink of ruin. As the leader of the Watchers, known as the Queen Bee, seems to have control over time, Seri has an immediate negative reaction to it, but they realise something, and make a mad dash to the onslaught of Watchers to get Seri to the monster. He manages to land on the beast's stomach as Kaim and Angelus succumb to the horde, then breaks his pact, releasing all of the built-up time stored from his pact, freezing all of the Watchers and creating a gigantic black spike that juts out of the earth and into space. And on a hauntingly beautiful piece of music, the game fades to black on its fourth ending, Ending D, the wild dreams of a deluded child. Drakengard also features a free expedition mode, which are just extra missions where you kill more enemies. There's absolutely no story in them. They're mainly for two things: grinding out weapon stories, and for finding hidden weapons not available in the story mode. So if you want to get the final ending, these missions are mandatory, since you have to obtain every single weapon to unlock Ending E. Honestly, in my opinion, the free expedition mode should have just been scrapped and the spare weapons just put into the actual levels, since you can replay any level at any time. Speaking of weapon stories, I wanted to read out some of my personal favourites in no particular order before I talk about Ending E. The first in my list of personal favourites is the Robber King. In a kingdom of the Union, a general beloved by the common people slew the wicked queen that had taken power when the king had died. The general came from the lowest class, making a living as a murderer and highwayman. After killing his 15th victim, he was at last captured by the authorities. Judgment was swift. The sentence was death. But the general had a great advantage. He was an extraordinarily handsome man. When the queen saw him, she could not bear to have him killed. She gave the general all her love, but her love turned to obsession. She became his prisoner, and he took her throne. People who knew him came to call him Robber King. Next is Kaim's sword. A gift to Kaim from his beloved father, Since he was a young child, Kaim had idolized his gentle father and longed to fight strongly and bravely in battle beside him. But the dark shadow of the Empire fell over their peaceful kingdom. The Empire grew stronger and stronger until one day, Kaim's castle was attacked by Imperial black dragons. "Kaim, take Furiae and flee," so ordered Kaim's father. But even before Kaim was able to answer, his parents were slain before his very eyes. Clutching the sword that was a gift from his father, Kaim swore upon it revenge for the loss of his kingdom and the murder of his parents. Even now, an unquenchable rage still fills his heart. Next is Butcher's Joy. Juices oozing from tender, succulent flesh, the sweet aroma of fine herbs. The master cook made dishes of meat that none in the city could resist. Every day, customers lined up outside his inn, waiting for their chance to partake. Even the king himself would sneak down from his castle to sample the master's art. But once he entered his kitchen, the smiling cook's face would grow stern. The meat he used was no ordinary meat. The years passed, and the cook and his inn disappeared from the town. But his cleaver remained as gleaming and sharp as ever, waiting for its next master. The next is Glory's Bane. Once upon a time, on a warm spring day, an evil dragon attacked a palace. He killed the royal family, the palace guard, and even the court jester, just because he felt like it. Satisfied with his work, the dragon settled down for a nap in the throne room. And it was then that a little girl walked in, holding a sword. She shook the dragon awake. She asked, "Could you tell me where the king is, please? I have to kill him." Rather taken aback, the dragon replies, "I've already eaten him." Hearing this, the girl bowed politely and said, "Thank you very much." Puzzled by her appreciation, the dragon asked, "Why do you thank me, little girl?" The girl replied, "The king you ate was not the true king. My dead mummy told me that he took the palace from my daddy. That's why I had to kill him, to get my palace back." The little girl wasn't lying either. She really was the rightful heir to the throne. The girl continued, "Now I'm queen. I'm going to kill all the people who let my daddy die." The dragon laughed and said, "Very well, little queen. Then I shall bestow my power onto you and your sword." So they exchanged their beating hearts. Then the little girl took her sword, slaughtered everyone, and lived happily ever after. Next is Hymir's Finger, the totally not dragon slayer from Berserk. Anyway, this is the largest sword in the world, too heavy for any mere mortal to lift. It is believed that till now, no warrior has been able to wield it. It was ordered forged by the warlord Kvark the Pitiless, made from the melted armor of his vanquished enemies. The sword announced Kvark's might and grandeur to the world. The sword grew heavier and heavier each time it took a life, and it gradually became more and more difficult to wield. At last, even its mighty owner could no longer swing it. One morning, Kvark the Pitiless was found dead. Beside him, dripping with flesh and dyed scarlet with blood, lay the sword. Who had managed to raise the mighty weapon against him? Next is Nobuyoshi, the sword of Kaim's father, and named after the composer as a little Easter egg. In a faraway eastern land, there was a poet who made a living reciting songs, but he keenly felt the limits of his own skills, and so he made a pact with a ghost. With the power of the ghost inside him, he began to compose glorious and beautiful songs. His fame spread throughout the city, and before long he was named the official poet to the imperial court. But one day the ghost returned to him, and she said thus, "Your life as a genius poet is over. You shall henceforth never sing a song again." It was as the ghost said. The poet fell silent, and no more songs came from his lips. His dream gone, he plunged this sword into his breast. It still gleams with the glistening of his blood. Next is Slaughterism. This sword belonged to a demented painter who murdered innocents every night and collected their blood. With this grisly harvest, He painted masterpieces the likes of which the world had never seen. The painter had a dream. He dreamt that one day he would create paintings so powerful that all who viewed them would be at peace. Each day he painted feverishly, chasing his dream, but none cared for his work, and he began to feel the cold, uncaring stares of others. Eventually, the soul of the sensitive artist was broken. Red, crimson, scarlet. In a frenzy, the artist embarked on a rampage of murder and creation. It did not end until he turned the sword on himself and forged his last masterpiece. I find this one particularly interesting due to the whispering voices saying exactly the same thing on the intro screen if left long enough. Cool little connection there.
Love. Crimson blood. Poison. Eternity. Revenge. Two. Sacrifice. Mother. Ritual. Scarlet. Prayers. Heresy. Hell. Solitude. Sky. Madness. God of world. Adore us.
Next is Knight's Vow. A long time ago, there was a dragon who could not fly. This gruff yet noble-hearted dragon had never seen a human until the day he came across a gravely injured knight. The dragon tended to the knight, but when the human opened his eyes, he stared in fright and tried to flee. In those days, wingless dragons were despised by men as ill omens. But the knight recovered, and vowed as he returned home to repay the dragon. Many years passed. One day, the aged dragon found himself surrounded by an army of men, and he prepared himself for death. "My wingless friend, it has been a long time!" Striding from behind the soldiers came the knight of old, now a king with an army of thousands. The dragon let out a roar of delight. Unless I'm missing something, this is one of the few stories in Drakengard with a happy ending, no strings attached. Next is Lovekeeper. A young couple, blessed by fortune, were to be wed, but on the night before the wedding, a small shining spirit appeared before the young bride. The ghost whispered in her ear, speaking straight to the weakness in her heart. Do you wish to make him all yours? Do you wish to ensure his heart is yours for all eternity? When the girl recovered her senses, she found this gore-splattered axe in her hand, and before her, the bloody head of her beloved. Now, he is yours forever. Next is Dragonstroke. This is a mace made from the scales of a dragon. In an age long before the founding of the Union and Empire, a man lived in terror of the subhumans. Tired of the oppression of the beasts, the people turned to a nameless young hero to throw off their yoke. To gain the strength he needed, the warrior resolved to enter a pact with the dragon. He challenged the dragon again and again, and lost again and again. Though he eventually beat the dragon, the creature was already pact beast to another, and victory was in vain. But, in recompense, the dragon offered a piece of her own wing. Armed with the mace forged of dragon flesh, the warrior battled the subhumans and brought peace to mankind. Next is Iron Scraps. A village of serfs, suffering under their lord's corrupt government, cobbled together this mace to serve as a weapon in their rebellion. Its crooked frame was shaped by the blood of their toil. No matter how they suffered, the Lord would not grant the serfs relief. With cries for justice and freedom, they gathered into a crowd and marched against their overseer. As dawn broke, the peasants charged into the castle. But there they found the Lord living as impoverished a life as their own. For as much as their Lord taxed the serfs, so was the Lord taxed by the king. The serfs took pity on their incompetent lord and cast aside their weapons. From now on, serf and lord lived in harmony, hunger and destitute, together. Next is the Pupils Club. This mace was made by an apprentice wizard with a single swing of a blacksmith's hammer. However, this apprentice could conjure little more than small flames. As big as an ogre with an appetite to match, the apprentice did not look much like a sorcerer, and he found himself bullied by his master and fellow apprentices. One day, he and another apprentice began a violent argument that did not end until the giant wizard lost his senses, swung his mace, and struck his colleague dead. As it tasted blood, the mace absorbed the fallen apprentice's magical powers. The pupil realized that he could make the weapon even stronger, so he slew his master with a blow to the head. Next is Spiked Wisdom. A philosopher was troubled by the ancient question, what is man? From whence is man born? And to what purpose? Did the gods place him here on this world? The philosopher brooded on the question, his eyes cast skyward for the answers. Amidst all of creation, surely mankind had a special purpose. Then the philosopher came to a realization. Amongst creation, amongst the stars, the sun, and the moon, only man has the power to destroy. Proudly, the philosopher announced his discovery. In the philosopher's audience, a single old man laughed. He took out a great mace and placed it before him. Right, he said. So this is the meaning of life? Next is Soul Dozer, a fearsome hammer that has the power to steal memories. With each blow of the weapon, the victim loses more of himself till he forgets his own identity. One day, a soldier who carried the burden of a sorrowful past acquired the hammer. He began to strike himself in the head so that one by one, his memories began to disappear. But as each unhappy memory was extinguished, an earlier one welled up in its place. Deaths of his comrades, the unhappy decision to become a soldier, the murder of his parents. When at last all the sad thoughts were gone, and only the memories of a child full of hope and promise remained, it was too late. The soldier's skull was broken, and he fell over dead. Next is Treasure Builder. There was once a man who built beautiful bridges that became treasures of his kingdom. So many treasures did he create, people came to say that the hammer was a tool of the gods. But one day, a war broke out between his country and its neighbor. All of the men of his kingdom were called to join the army, and the builder was no exception. The man who hated destruction was no warrior, and in the midst of the war, the architect was killed, and the beautiful towns and bridges he created were reduced to mere broken rock. Until the moment of his death, the builder did not once take another man's life. Will the next owner of the hammer of the gods be a lover of creation or destruction? And finally, we have the Tyrant's Hammer. In a land ruled by a gang of demons, 10 young idealists resolved to take up this weapon and rise against the evil overseers. But none of the cowed citizenry rose to fight with them. The human rebels were nonetheless victorious. The demons were vanquished. As the rebels rebuilt the government, all agreed the weapon they used were imbued with the power of God. But the young leaders began to forget their ideal world without fear. With secret informers and public executions, their rule turned into one of terror and tyranny. The people rose up against them. The 10 were arrested and sentenced to public execution. Once again, the people would witness the power of the weapon that had chased away the demons. Okay, let's talk about Ending E now. It begins almost identically to the setup of Ending D, except instead of yeeting Seri onto the Queen Bee's stomach, Kaim and Angelus take the fight directly to it, and somehow the three end up falling through a hole in time and space. We get a shot of a modern-looking city in black and white before the sky opens up and the aforementioned three come tumbling through it. Angelus asks if this could be the land of the gods, and the game displays text as if to answer her directly. Not at all. It's Tokyo. Somehow, they've fallen through to then modern-day Tokyo. The final boss isn't an aerial or ground combat mission like the player will be accustomed to. It's a rhythm game. Yes, I'm dead serious. Yoko Taro originally wanted this to be a popular Japanese idol at the time, since this was purely meant to be a joke ending, serving as a homage to the end of Evangelion. Most obvious with the name of the ending, the end of the Dragon Sphere. The reason why I say was is being that this ending went on to become the catalyst for the much more popular Nier series, but that's a story that we'll wait for another time. After I won't lie, extremely grueling battle, like took me about 2 hours to complete kind of battle, the Queen Beast dissolves, and Angelus gets shot down by the Japanese Air Force almost immediately after, with her crumbling body being impaled on top of Tokyo Tower, and Kaim being presumed dead. The credits roll and the sounds of the hustle and bustle of Tokyo. The only thing to show for your efforts for completing the game is an extra mission of fighting the Air Force, and upon winning, you can play as a fighter jet in any aerial mission, which, I gotta admit, is pretty funny in Drakengard's setting. So, is Drakengard a good game? I don't think it's outright terrible, but it's very clearly grappling with what it wants to be. The aerial missions range from great to pretty above average, and the ground missions in a vacuum aren't horrible to start off with, but with how long and monotonous the later levels can get, they quickly drag the game down. The main thing keeping you hooked is the story, and yes, it is probably the weakest of Taro's games in that aspect, but it's also his first, and it's a hell of a first attempt. I can't name many titles touching on the sheer amount of controversial subjects in 2003. And whilst it could have handled those themes a bit better and have some of the characters be a touch more likable, I disagree that the game is purely an edgy or shock value experience. The reason being that the characters are never once rewarded for their heinous actions, and those deserving meet a pretty grisly end. I appreciate Drakengard, I'm happy it exists, but this is a game that I'm most likely never going to be touching again.